Over to you, Jarrod.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jarrod Gingras. I'm the Managing Director and Lead DAM Analyst at the Real Story Group, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to day one of the Festival of DAM. And I'm excited to welcome some panel guests today. We have Alex and Molly, who are going to be talking about DAM implementation, setting up your DAM to work for you. Now, in the 20 years that Real Story Group has been analyzing the marketing technology space, and in particular the DAM space, you know, we've been screaming at the top of our lungs saying that the most critical thing that you need to do is pick the right DAM for what it is you're trying to do, or the right technology for what it is you're trying to do. And that's still the case today, just as much as it was 20 years ago. But we all know there's no perfect technology out there. There's no single DAM that's just going to check every single box for your organization and do everything right the day you plug it in. It just doesn't work like that. So while I want you to get as close as you can to perfect, there's still that extra little effort that goes into any implementation, where you need to configure that DAM, maybe customize it to meet your organization's needs. And although we'd like to avoid it, sometimes you even need to extend that DAM to do something really special for your organization. So there's always that balance of configuring, customization, and extension when we talk about implementation. So with that, there's a lot that goes into those three little words: configuring, customizing, and extending technology. So like I mentioned, we have two panelists here today. We're going to share their expertise and their experiences that they've gone through in doing just that, doing implementations at various organizations. So I'm pleased to welcome Molly from Big Lots and Alex from the Lincoln Center for Performing Arts, but the newest employee of Lincoln Center for Performing Arts as of next week, I think. But she's gonna be talking a lot about her experience at Hachette Book Group as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Molly and Alex to tell us a little bit about themselves and their role, and give us some context, so that we can understand where they're coming from and where their experiences and lessons learned have come from that they're going to be sharing today. So Molly, I'll start with you. Tell us about your role at Big Lots.
Absolutely. So starting a little bit broader, I've been with DAM specifically for about 5+ years now, although I feel it's probably been a bit longer than that, and I've gotten stuck saying 5+. Big Lots has been a year-long journey now in the implementation. So it was the selection, implementation, configuring, all that you talked about and more, and getting it to the right space for a rather large, robust company with a lot of fantastic creative. So that has been the journey I've been on for the last year. Previous to that, I have worked in other retail, manufacturing, QSR spaces. This one, I think, has been the most invested in the right establishment for implementation, making sure that they were geared up with the right resources for that implementation. So.
Great. Well, welcome, Molly. Thanks for that. And Alex.
Hello.
Tell us about your transitional role at the moment.
I know, as Jarrod said, I just finished a role at HBG, and I'll be starting at Lincoln Center next week. So what do we say? An independent expert, I guess, this week. So I have a traditional library archive background and worked at universities and the like. And then when I was working at Condé Nast, we got a digital asset management system, and that really kind of propelled me forward. And at this point, I've got more than 10 years experience in the DAM world, kind of working on the same thing, kind of what DAM are we going to get, how are we going to set it up. And it's been interesting just kind of seeing the different needs and the different uses of digital asset management systems at different places over time.
Yeah. Well, Alex, welcome to the session, and congrats on the new gig, and best of luck with everything going forward there. That's exciting times. So here's how we're going to run this panel today. So we have as I mentioned, when it comes to implementation, there's a ton of topics we can cover, and we're going to try to cover as many as we can in the next 40 minutes or so. But I also want to throw it out to those of you who are watching online today. If you have questions, please put questions in the Q&A module of Hugelo, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go through this, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can as well. So we're going to try to move quickly and get through as many topics as we can, and hopefully, you all can take us in some different directions than we're even thinking about. But we're happy to go in a variety of different directions here. But let's logically start the beginning, okay? And when we talk about implementation, there's always this struggle, if you will, around who is going to be driving that implementation. So in every implementation, there's the people in your seats, the buyers of the technology, if you will, the people responsible for taking on this new challenge in your organization. Then there's the vendor and the professional services that they're bringing to the table. And then sometimes there's even a third party, whether it's a technical implementation team, or maybe even someone bringing to the table some softer skills. Maybe it's a consultant around taxonomy or metadata or content migration, content cleanup, that kind of thing. So I'm just curious, in your perspective, what's the team structure look like? What's the right blend of people that need to be at the table to do this right?
So for this latest implementation that we were a part of, it was the first time that I had the opportunity to work with a legacy technical implementation partner. And I say legacy in the sense that they had worked with them on previous projects. It was a bit of a no-brainer who they were going to go to. They had a trust there that was previously built to my arrival. So that was very fortunate. Not everyone is able to come to a table that already has that technical partner there. And while it comes with some complications in the way of you are now managing, in a sense, 3 different project managers. You've got the vendor, you've got the implementation partner has their own project manager, you've got your own project manager over here. And so you're going to be in that battle of timelines and communication. Ultimately, for the size that we were, I think it was the right choice. I think it was absolutely necessary. And I was in a peak position, a very privileged position to be able to come in and have that selected for me, as opposed to for maybe the first time having to scrounge for what is the right direction. Do we need a consultant versus a technical partner versus anything else? That was pretty well and ready as an idea, which is fantastic. And I do encourage taking a hard look at reaching out to a potential technical partner, whether or not it's one that you've known previously on other projects unrelated to DAM, but you know that they are a trusted resource that could potentially offer development to that, or whether or not you're unsure in the way of taxonomy. There's so many times that I see a reluctance to go in those directions, not just due to cost, but perhaps a unwillingness to surrender a certain degree of control over timeline, resource, communication, and it can be so worthwhile with the right vetting. You certainly don't overextend simply to have a partner, but it was definitely the right decision in our court. So,
great, Alex, how about you?
I think it was similar. We knew we needed that. We knew we needed a new dam at Hachette. We had a legacy system that was very old, very geriatric, very not working well at all. And we had done some kind of preliminary user listening groups, creating, user stories around the company. And then the decision was made to bring in a consulting team to help us with the selection process, to kind of go through, kind of narrow down the field of a great myriad of vendors to kind of 3 or 4 for us to really kind of put a lot of time and effort into getting to know them, getting to know the product, hopefully getting to have them understand what we really needed. And that process took a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I think we came to the right decision in the end, because I think, as you said too, you can have the best system in the world, but if it doesn't work for your specific needs, then it kind of is a moot point.
And I'll second that experience. We also had a resource, not the same resource as our technical partner, but a resource that was able to help us vet these very robust vendor offers. Obviously, having my own experience with those vendors, there can be biases. You only see one side of those opportunities, and they were able to dig down to layers of IT through creative, through marketing, all the possible assets that they could offer. All that they could offer in those departments. And yes, I feel like it's always one of those, it takes a little longer than you expect, but I think that's for me, it's the alignment process. You want all the teams to be aligned and fully on board with what changes this will bring. And so that usually does take a little bit of overtime.
Yeah, and I'll just add, as one of those consultants who are often helping clients with this selection process, I if you can do it, I know, Molly, you were in a different situation where you already had an implementation party, that had a relationship with the company that was there. But if you, in the absence of that, if you have a full control over, who you're bringing in, I would encourage anyone who's thinking that their needs are going to extend beyond what they're going to get from a vendor, then to have the vendor and a third party come to the table and present to you a total solution, right? So, when you do your vendor demo, your head-to-head demo weeks and your bake-offs and proof of concepts and the like, have them do it together. So, because that's how it's going to work in the real world, right? That's how it's really going to work. And your vendor is going to have to communicate with the project manager from the implementer and your project manager. And so if you can make it as real as possible, that's your time to test that, right? Don't test it during the implementation. Test it as soon as you can, if you can. I know that's not always the case.
Yeah, I'm also very much with that get your promises where they're handing them to you hand in hand with each other, and not just offering floating promises coming from both parties of what is feasible, technically, possibly.
And I've been in situations where we actually set up demos like this. Like we're in demo weeks and I'm sitting in the room representing a client, and the vendor and the third party were actually arguing with each other, like in front of the buyers, and it was like getting contentious, and they were really arguing. And after they left the room, they turned to me and was like, "Should we read into that?" And I was like, "Yes, you should." that's a massive red flag, and that's not going to end. So if they're willing to argue in that environment, then you might want to look at your other options. So. All right, that's great. Let's talk about though your internal challenges, right? I'm always interested between you as business owners versus your IT counterparts and the like, and you just I'm always curious about the dynamics between business and IT. And anytime you bring in new technology, there can be some tension there about who owns what, who's responsible for what, or a lot of times IT wants to be really responsible. In other cases, they're like, I don't want to touch it. Don't involve me. So I'm curious of your experiences there. If you have any lessons learned around, playing both sides of the house there. How do you work with your counterparts across the aisle? Alex,
I think early alliance.
Oh,
no,
go ahead, Molly.
I was just going to say early alliance with IT, I think is critical. That was something that fortunately I was able to do in this regard is get the temperature on what their experience had been with our legacy dam and how they had been informed on its workings previous. So in this case, responsibilities had fallen to them given the legacy nature of it and the unsupported nature of it, that they were very eager to see supported by more out-of-the-box features, things that could actually be handed to the dam manager. So there was some support in that regard, but there was also understandable resistance to what kind of bandwidth is that going to draw from us. As much as I think there's sort of the gag that IT is always sort of the last domino to fall, they are often looking at it from a very important and realistic perspective of something that we consider to be a small switch flick is something that cascades down through other resources, time, effort, and they have a clearer perspective on that side. So I do think that the overextension of time that sometimes occurs in order to topple that domino is well worth it, keeping it as non-contentious as possible. If that answers the question. So
yeah, we had a really good relationship with IT for our project. They were very understanding that we needed a new contemporary, modern dam system for the company to kind of move forward and succeed. But I think some of it was there was the time of, it's a very heavy lift when you're installing a new dam, when you're implementing a dam. And there's that sort of, mentally it won't be like that forever. That this is kind of a, a couple months, 6 months or whatever, very heavy lift. And then as you said, their resources should kind of peter out. Our old dam was very, very labor intensive. It needed constant maintenance just to stay alive, not even function well. So you sort of keep focusing on the future, but it's very hard to focus on the future when you're asking them to build connections between this system and verify this system and why don't we do this and why don't we do that? There's a lot of asks on the implementation, but I think overall, as you said too, if you don't have a good relationship, the whole project I think is going to be very, very, very problematic. So at least we had buy-in of the necessity for it. That it because sometimes I feel a lot of times you're the only person that's kind of dragging that message up the hill to everyone, but at least that was there for us at Hachette.
Yeah, I think we were in a similar position in which it had impacted IT enough that they definitely understood the necessity of it. But they had a familiar wariness that it would be constantly reapproached with additional asks that were demanded as though they were simple asks, but they did not feel that they were going to get the opportunity to communicate just how complex this could be. And so making sure that they have that voice in the governance and the establishment of that dam early on, so that they feel that they can voice, we are agreeable to doing this, here's why we would be wary of this, and not just assuming that they are dragging, in the dirt because they can. They're reasonable professionals that want to get their work done, but they don't want to be, hassled about with what to them is a completely different creative language of what's necessary. And I think that's some of the biggest conflicts that I see is often just a misalignment of communication, the language used. Oftentimes they are on the same team, they are on the same side. They're just communicating in different languages.
Right. All right, so let's assume that we've kicked off we found the perfect dam. Well, there's no perfect dam, as close to perfect of a dam that you can. You've kicked off this project. You have your IT stakeholders on board. Now the project's starting, right? So the vendors coming in with maybe their third party, and they're saying, okay, let's do some requirements gathering. And you're finding, going back to my initial comments here, you're finding things that you need to configure within the dam, and then you might find items that require a little bit more customization, and then maybe there's some items that the vendor's telling you in order to do that you'd have to extend the product in a different direction. And so I'm curious about your internal process of how you make sense of all the different things that come up from the different stakeholders. How do you prioritize, which things get done as part of an initial phase of an implementation versus which things get pushed off to phase 2, 3, 4, 5? We'll don't call us, we'll call you, kind of things that get way down that roadmap. So I'm just curious, how do you just practically, logistically, how do you manage that influx of information that's coming in? And maybe Alex, you can take this one to start.
Yeah, I think a lot of people at Hachette, it's a publishing group, and a lot of people either had never worked with a dam before, or if they had worked with a dam, it was the same system that we had at Hachette, but maybe slightly better implemented, which still was not a wonderful system. So a lot of the kind of the user requirement stakeholder thing was not just finding out what people did and how a dam could help them, or in some way was kind of educating people on what a contemporary dam would do, because a lot of the asks were so painfully simple. It was just sort of like, I would like to create a collection and share it with someone outside the company, and all I'm thinking is like, yeah, of course every dam does that. This isn't, but to them it was a big deal. To a lot of our users it was a big deal. And then we had incredibly complicated things that people were like, well, we also need to create this very, 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 very complicated data model and parent-child relationship and how the metadata will cascade down and also work with our PIM system. So that was a lot, as you said. And in terms of like configure and customize, a lot of it was the data structure, which was so completely unsexy. And so something nobody asked for us to be like, could you please mirror the data structure in the PIM to work? This was not something that anyone ever voiced to us in any way, shape, or form, but this is something that we knew had to happen on the back end to make all of these other requests happen. to kind of make that. I want to create a collection of, I don't know, every cover image for this author everywhere. Well, that wouldn't work unless everything was tied to an author name or a title name or things like that, which was kind of the back end. So those were sort of things that we really needed to sync up a little bit for our use, like I said too. And some of it was like I said too, was the very the very deep nerd back end to kind of the front end user request to kind of make people happy and want to use the DAM and want to engage with the product, which is really the kind of the main thing you want. It's great if the DAM is wonderful, like you said too, but if no one wants to use it, then you didn't really succeed at all.
And seconding that again, I find that there is a outreach, the vendors outreach to the users is often, here's best practice, here's best practice, here's best practice. And those are always wonderful. And I think especially early on as an early DAM manager, you want to be doggedly pursuing those best practices. And that's what feels like success. But the reality is there is best practices and there is the reality of how these professionals have functioned for maybe decades. So you have to meet in the middle, and sometimes the overhaul from a legacy DAM, if it is even fully functioning as a DAM, and legacy process over to the new DAM is not the leap to overwhelming process improvement. It's a leap to that the priority becomes ironing out the kinks, bringing them over to a brighter, shinier, but very familiar space, as familiar as you can make it while having removed some of the most critical errors, hurdles that were there in process. And then this is where I really encourage DAM managers to take a project management course or a course that has anything to do around the prioritization of projects and tasks, because there are methods, charts, means for you to point gather, whatever means that you particularly like to do. And that is what I do, which is that I take a look at all these process improvements I would like to make phase-wise, as time, resources, cash allows. And I'm able to measure out what is the most impactful in terms of time saving, experience, for the user experience, relative to cost, relative to time, because you have to take all of those into account if you're going to break them out into phases. Because yes, when we brought it over, we certainly made some process improvements, but largely they were shinier, buffed out versions of existing processes that were a bit faulty. So the first leap was not one of every idea we have on the table that came at us has been implemented. It was definitely we're bringing it over. It's going to be a much more comfortable space. It's going to be a much more functional space with none of the kinks and complaints that we would see day to day. But outside of that, here's the list we gathered of user stories outside of that. And here's the story they told in terms of in the next 3 months, 6 months, year, these are the things that would be an absolutely critical improvement to the user experience. Here's something that would merely be a convenience down the road, and so on. But for me, the way that I determine those is usually through project management charts and means measuring.
Oh, great. I'm always interested at especially at larger organizations where when you start evangelizing this notion of a new technology like a digital asset management, I imagine you have a lot of people who have some experience with DAM, maybe in a previous job or maybe just reading around, and trying to learn little bits and pieces of what DAM is. And you have some people who are, truly lots of experience in DAM, and then some probably have almost little to no experience or even knowledge of what it is and what it should do and what it promises and all that kind of thing. So I know you both have kind of touched on this, but I want to really get into this change management notion of an implementation success, right? That it has to start fairly early, especially like I said, in a large organization where there's so many different stakeholders, so many different perspectives, so many different backgrounds. How do you just start telling the story of DAM and then related to that, like what dam is and then what it isn't, especially as it relates to kind of this surrounding ecosystem. And Alex, you already mentioned the PIM technology in your organization. That's just one other adjacent technology. We've even had sessions in this conference about talking about how closely related PIM and DAM can be at times, and that can be confusing to a lot of people. And that's just one system. There's a whole myriad of other systems. So content management systems, data systems, how do you start telling a story? What is a DAM and what isn't for a whole variety of different stakeholders?
I use PowerPoint. No, so what I do is I usually set up early on. One of the things I do out of the gate is immediately determine who has the balance of day-to-day knowledge of their team and yet the authority to speak for them above and below. And those are the people that I pull from for a governance reference of, what kind of decision making can be made that impacts those teams. And then in addition to that, I want them to immediately be educated on what it is that they're having their hands, what pot they have their hands in. So I do, and not everyone needs to do it in this particular way, but I hold ongoing rotating sessions of information that are optional but critical, that they should attend at some point and perhaps revisit throughout their career with the DAM throughout the years. And one of them is PIM versus DAM versus CMS. And those are ones that I do really early on. And I've done it multiple times with Big Lots, and I've had folks that have come to the session multiple times because they want to revisit their understanding of it. But I think it has to be plain. It's not a discussion that I find I can successfully have casually passing, making mention of what DAM is and isn't. I have to say, DAM, CMS, PIM. What is PIM to DAM? What is CMS to DAM? What is this to that? What is it? What is it not? And I even get so far as saying, here's an example. What would this be? Here's an example. What would this be? And I think it has been incredibly helpful in lessening the change management issues you were talking about, where people start to come at you with suggestions and ideas without really understanding the full scope or where their request lands, or what it impacts, and you can't always expect that someone's going to, see the session and then have full understanding of those sorts of things. But having a better idea of, oh, this isn't a DAM ask, or this is a DAM ask, but it's a complex one that also connects with PIM, something like that.
I think it is a PIM, but no one actually calls it a PIM. I think if you said that, you would get a lot of blank looks. At Hachette, aside from the few people in IT, but you said too, this is the first place I've worked with at Hachette was with a structured governance board. Again, finding the kind of people and the resources around the company to be advocates for the system, to both get information from and give information back to their team or the group that they work with. And that was very helpful. And that's what I said too. It was a lot of education. Like I said too, it was more a matter of, it wasn't sort of like, what do you do with the DAM now? It was just, what do you do? And how can the DAM dip in? And like a lot of people, if you work with the CMS, then you want the CMS to do everything. If you're more comfortable working in the PIM, then you want that to do everything, or you want the DAM to do everything. I think in the implementation, it was a lot of push-pull as to people really wanted to kind of force things into the system that they were comfortable in, which is human nature. But at the same time, if it's a digital asset and we have this thing called a digital asset management system, maybe we should focus it in there and make one right turn instead of 3 left turns to get to the same place. And that was, I wish, in retrospect, that would have been a great idea if I had like a DAM PIM CMS kind of training session for people. I'll write that down, make a little note for myself. That would have been very helpful. I was more trying to focus on people of what, like I said, more what a modern contemporary DAM could do for them, and also what it couldn't do for them. Sometimes there's a matter of what a system can do, what you want it to do, and what it just doesn't do. And not because it's a bad system, because that's just not what the system should be doing. That's just not the capacity of, like I said, of that system. So.
And I think you said it really well with, how do you use the DAM versus what do you do? Like, what do you use for the DAM for versus what do you do? And so often one of the process improvements that I've made for myself as a dam manager is starting to ask that question. Oftentimes I find that users have a number of processes that they hold to be evident that are not evident to others, because it's sort of the room you're in that's blue, and you've been in the blue room so long that someone asks you what color it is and you're like, it's sort of gone out of sight, out of mind. And so having to dig down and not just ask, what do you do with the dam, you're going to get a much more limited response, and then have to account for the little bits of, oh, this also connects to the dam, oh, this also connects to the dam, oh, is that the dam? Get a lot more of that, as opposed to what is it you do, and then be able to spot check yourself.
Yeah, and I'll just say, as an industry analyst who's watching all three of these spaces, you know, the dam, the CMS, and the PIM marketplaces, I can tell you, this challenge for many of you who are on watching this today is not going away. In fact, it might be getting harder. You know, I'm seeing a lot of dam vendors who want to be PIM vendors, who want to be content management system vendors, and vice versa and vice versa. You know, this is all these lines between these marketplaces, if you will, are getting really blurry, and for good reason in some cases. But as the people on the implementation side, this is going to be challenging, and especially as it is educating our peers and colleagues around what should be going here, what should we be using this for, and what shouldn't we be using this for. I want to get in, kind of move down the spectrum of an implementation. You know, we started about building the team, and we talked about the what happens with IT and business, and we've talked about some of the challenges as it relates to education. But as you go through an implementation, there's a big period of testing, right? That needs to happen, and quality assurance at various stages of an implementation process. So sometimes that can be a burden, you know, or most times that can be a burden, but in other cases that can be an opportunity too, right? It can be an opportunity to get people into the system and start using it, start trying things out in a you know, fairly non-intimidating environment, so that when you do go live, people have had some experience with the technology and processes that you're putting in place. So I'm curious from your perspective, you know, what was your experience with training? Any best practices to kind of pass along to those on the call today?
So for our
testing and then training is what I meant.
Testing and training, yeah.
Yeah.
They can definitely be completely different, but also, especially towards the end, start to cross over. Yeah, testing, of course, occurred throughout. We had a wonderful project manager and a great partner, so all of that was well arranged and well transparent to me. Very fortunately, we didn't have an enormous amount of failed testing. But that does occur, and you always brace for it. Don't have a lot of remarks on the testing itself, other than breaking it out into eatable chunks was definitely important, and not just going, you know, we've produced the whole mass, now I guess we're gonna have to test it end to end. It should have been tested at absolutely every step in that process. And then towards the end, yes, we did have end-to-end testing, and then that end-to-end testing almost immediately became, let's take a look at these first users. In our case, we leaned heavily on the creative governance members and their immediate reports, and some trusted few that we knew could report on how that experience reflected legacy to brand new. So yes, there was definitely some testing and onboarding crossover. And then in the following week, we then had ongoing 3 times daily training sessions to allow the flexibility of which ones they would like to attend. And then, of course, I did about probably some months later, it depends on how your teams respond to that training, additional training or revisiting that training to come back and, you know, see what has fallen out of sight, out of mind in their day-to-day process. So
I think that was at our testing. We had a sort of split. There was kind of an IT QC team, and that was very black, white, no gray area, which was wonderful, but also slightly, sometimes we had to go back and evaluate what we were asking them to test. and also what they were doing. It was delightful because they would do things for as much as you're a damn manager and you implement a system and you think to yourself, I'm going to try to break the system. They would do things, terrible, terrible things that I would never have dreamed of doing. But it was good because now we knew if you uploaded a CSV instead of an image and tried to change content type in the system, then what would happen? And we thought, why would that happen? And you're like, why wouldn't it happen? Who knows what people do? So that was really helpful. I wish we actually had our governance board and maybe super users in a little bit earlier. There was always we were waiting for one more thing to be done, one more thing to be done, one more thing to be right. And I'm just kind of a person that if they don't like it, they don't like it, but it's better we know now than before it's completely done. And also at some point, even if it isn't exactly what they want, just like you said, just getting a familiarity with the system. I'm always you may not have everything you want, but maybe we can focus on how good the search is and how good the sharing is and how good all these other things are. Yes, maybe this one part isn't exactly 100% what you want, but all these other things are doing infinitely better than the other systems. So, like I said, I think for us it was kind of like I said, managing the black and white QC team and the more touchy feely kind of just do a search for an author name, and just sort of see how people did things, not so much the exact precise results that they got in the testing. That was interesting to me.
Yeah, the beta testing of the early users definitely helped inform training.
Yeah, and I'll just add, there's for many of us, we try to be perfectionists, right? I think, Alex, to your point, it's like you want it to be perfect before you show it off, show off your work, right? And it's that old expression, perfection is the enemy of good enough, right? And sometimes good enough is okay to get people, seeing the progress, and you'll keep moving towards perfection as you go along, but you don't have to wait for perfection to move to that next stage. I think that's something that's not always easy for all of us, but we sometimes have to get there. We've got some really good questions that have come in so far, and I encourage in the last few minutes here, if anyone else has some lingering thoughts, please feel free to add that. But a question we had was around, the job descriptions and the responsibilities of people who would actually be using this new system that you're bringing on board. And I think with new technology, new processes, sometimes job descriptions or even roles that are needed to manage that new system might change from the previous world, right? From the pre-technology versus post-technology. So I'm curious, how do you do that analysis? When do you do that analysis? How early in the process is that done? And in your case, were new roles needed?
I was the new role.
So
So yes, there had never been a dedicated DAM professional. There had been a recognition in the company very early on of the value of DAM, and that is how they got their legacy system. So enormous kudos to that. But I think it's very easy when a company is recognizing the value of that to not realize that it often needs its own lion tamer, so to speak. They sort of think, oh, that'll fall to creative. Marketing will do it. IT will do it. And then it becomes a mounting maintenance and stalling because there's no one to look forward to innovations. There's no one there to speak for them, advocate for them. So in our case, those roles of management have been falling to creatives and marketers and IT that were absolutely doing their very best to keep it all together. And the fact that they kept it all together as long as they did speaks to their dedication to trying to make a DAM work. But coming in, it was definitely evident that no one particularly had the keys to the kingdom. So in that case, yes, the role was created. Past that, no additional roles were needed. There was no, specific IT person, specific creative contact, anything like that was necessary. But yes, I was the new role. So.
I think the same as Molly. I was the new role, and much like you said, something that's everyone's child is really no one's child. Or someone would get very excited about it for 6 months, and then another project would come up, and then they would their focus would turn to something else, and then things would happen. So was definitely helpful. And as soon as I got there, I sort of, I think I was there a few months. I was like, we're going to get a new digital asset management system, right? Like no one here thinks this is good. And then it just kind of took off from there. But yeah, at the same time, it was sort of people were very like people were very fly man the elephant. IT saw one part of the dam, like you said too, the creative groups, the production groups saw another part. So um, having one person be responsible for things was able to have everyone come in and
Yeah.
figure out what everyone was doing and how everyone was adding to that conversation. So it was helpful.
Yeah, being able to
Yeah,
consolidate those kind of communications and improvements through a dam manager is very, very important.
yeah. I think one of the highlights of my career, at least, I think, is every time I go to the in-person Henry Stewart events, in New York, in California, and London, I invariably have dam managers come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm the new dam manager because after that you recommended they X, Y, and Z hire to manage the new technology they brought in, and that's been such a fun thing for me, and it's something that's such a fun part of this community that exists around the Henry Stewart events is that the dam managers all kind of stick together and we have this little bit of a community here and it continues in the session like this, but it's great to meet everyone in person when that happens, because it really, in my world, it's not just about technology, right? There is a people aspect to it, and still, none of this works without the right people to handle that technology. All right, we just have a few minutes left. We have about 4 minutes left, but I wanted to kind of finish this session off with a question to you both. That you've been through the trenches, you've been through these things, in some cases multiple times. If you were to do it again, is there something that you would change? Is there something that you would do fundamentally different than your younger self did? When you went through this the first time, or the second time, or the third time? In your next time, is there something that you would say, hey, let's do it differently? I know, Alex, you're starting a new job, so maybe you'll have the opportunity someday to do it soon, to do it again. But what do you think? What would you do differently if you could start from scratch?
I forever see communication improvements that I can do for myself. Speaking as the dam manager for any number of projects, it's an ever imperfect, ever improving process of tying the threads between multiple departments and multiple teams with multiple goals. And earlier on, I always end up feeling like I should do that earlier. And often it comes back to bringing all hands to the table and letting everyone know who is going to have authority, when they'll have authority, about what they'll have authority, getting that education on the table faster, more thorough, more frequent. So it's, for me, definitely my improvements always come back to whether or not it's communicating how those change management, the phases are going to roll out, what that's going to look like to manage expectations so far as how those changes are going to occur, so that there's no confusion about, it's going to come out of the gate with all the whirly, all this kind of thing. It's just earlier and better communication always, and never expecting that you're going to do it perfectly, but each time incrementally getting a little bit better at managing those expectations, managing that communication, and making everyone feel like they're on the same boat together and not managing their own sinking ships.
Great.
I'll definitely agree with the communication. I think that's a incredibly big part. It's one thing to explain to someone who's never used a dam what they can do. It's another thing to just kind of show them, to be like, or there's this, or there's that, or there's the other thing. I think that's very, very important. I think this is the third time at Hachette going through a dam implementation, and it's every time feels like a new time because there's always a new system or a new challenge. But I definitely think some things I was more comfortable on, or at least I understood the importance of more just sort of like metadata mapping, which sounds so simple, but isn't. Just sort of some very, like I said, like which is a very in the trenches sort of thing to get bogged down on, but it is one of the things that definitely means a lot to people when they get into the system. And I feel I don't like to, well, nothing will ever be perfect. I don't like to make it easy for people to point out flaws to us. You know what I mean? I like to, not that there won't be there, but I like to make it a little bit more challenging for them to find the mistakes in the system. And that's definitely one of the things that people will find almost immediately and take great glee in telling you that it's wrong. So, I think that's it. Maybe a little bit of spit and polish on systems as well before the flip is switched to go live.
Absolutely. Well, Molly and Alex, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. This was I didn't have any worries about us filling up the time, and I know we could keep talking about this topic for forever. But I would encourage anyone who has attended the session today, if you have follow-ups, to reach out to Molly or Alex. I'm sure they'd be glad to chat in the future. And to everyone that attended, thank you so much for your time.